Like, are there great things to fish out of Lake Michigan?
Salmon. They stock the silver salmon and mostly to deal with the zebra mussels, actually, if I recall correctly.
Okay, so this is part of this whole process.
And then the salmon
let's bring in another invasive species.
Yeah, and then the salmon got fucked by the sea lampreys because the sea lampreys arrived through the St. Lawrence Seaway and immediately, would suck onto the fish. And
by got fucked, you mean like their population was damaged by it, or like they crossbred?
No, that would be disgusting.
I know. Well, fish don't really fuck either.
The sound of them
I love the idea of a crossbred eel and salmon. It's a very, very long, flat salmon.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only Great Lakes ecology podcast. I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And joining us, once again, our first return guest on this show. Very exciting. We have the one, the only, the illustrious, the inimitable Nate Bethea.
Hello.
Round of applause. Say hello to the good
hello.
folks.
Yeah,
Nate.
thank you again for having me back. I managed to get COVID after 2 years of hiding in London, a place that's been famously good at avoiding disease pandemics.
Yeah.
And
just like New York.
Exactly. I was thinking about this recently. Yeah, we guys talk about the Great Lakes ecology. Indiana gets a huge amount of credibility for being a Great Lakes state, for having like 10 miles of Great Lakes coastline.
Yeah,
basically,
and it's really all just Chicago too, if we're being real.
Gary gets the water for the U.S. Steel plant from Lake Michigan, and then the Indiana Dunes and whatnot right up there. But other than that, like
also a great song. They get a great song, Gary.
Gary, Indiana from the Music Man. Is that from the Music Man?
It is, in fact.
Yeah, it is. Back on Broadway, and it's not very good.
That sucks.
You heard it here
I was
first.
thinking about it too, because there was this thing I saw shared around about like my wife is from Rhode Island, and so Rhode Island is constantly ignored because it's such a small state. And someone made a map of like every state in America, naming the city they make fun of the most in their state, and they just forgot to put a city for Rhode Island.
That's funny.
But for Indiana, it was Gary, and I was like, okay, for racism. And the person getting mad about it for Rhode Island was a little Central Falls, and it's clearly the one we all make fun of. And my wife was like, also racism. So it's just a nice reminder that this is a thing that every American state shares. And even in Odyssey, there's a problem with bigotry.
Exactly.
Nate, I have a question. I have a question for you, Nate.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you came on this podcast and you listened to 4 episodes of Adventures in Odyssey, and then you left for a while and thought, you know what I want more of is Adventures in Odyssey.
Yeah, what was that all about?
Can you
I like
explain
you
the
guys,
thought
and I like your
process behind
podcast. The show is fun to talk about, and the drops are hilarious. Everything is a lot of fun on this show. Actually, listening to Adventures in Odyssey makes me want to fucking die. It is the worst part of coming on here.
That would be a hell of a way to die.
The fact that you guys like doing this show is basically, I think there's the group therapy aspect of everyone having to suffer through this dog shit radio play that makes it more fun, because it's sort of like in the same way that there's probably a weird sense of camaraderie after doing like a particularly grueling road race or something along those lines.
Right.
Like, you have to suffer through some of the
We on the
dumbest
Mad
bullshit
Max
you ever
Fury Road
heard
of
in your
Odyssey
life.
podcasts.
Yeah. You know, people used to do the Melia, but I just make people marathon Adventures in Odyssey.
Exactly. Well, we'll have to get you on at some point again to talk about something that you actually like. You know, like we were able to get Josh Sawyer on to talk about a Coriolanus adaptation that you really enjoyed. So, you know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel here, perhaps. But
for now, we're in the muck.
Or for now that light at the end of the tunnel is actually an oncoming train. We're back to Odyssey, and
here we go.
Woo! We're gonna get started here by talking about the episode One Bad Apple.
It spoils the brunch. Jesus. It is Sunday, so I guess it's a
Yes, well, with those libs and their brunch.
That's right. I thought it was so interesting how this one started off with Chris just doing a weird ass fucking monologue.
But to be fair, she is right. I have been hearing a lot about the environment lately.
More and more are saying this.
How it's so important that we help the environment
in an unspecified way.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's so much about this first episode that is like it's almost there. It's like it's so close and then completely misses the point at the end, as I think most Odyssey episodes do. But Nate, did you learn about how to take care of the environment from this episode? Did you take away like any heartfelt lessons?
I mean, in a way, I was taken aback by the inherent contradictions of a right-wing children's radio play by deranged evangelicals having to concede that environmentalism is important, but also having to exculpate big business by making it very, very clear that almost all businesses are really good in the environment. It's just that this one was bad. I also was taken aback by the fact that the government sort of plays the role of the good guy in this, but also doesn't answer the phone.
Sort of.
Because the libs are bad and the government is bad, but also then it's also pointed out that there's been government cuts to things like environmental services. And it's like, you mean the things you guys are constantly fucking beating the drum for.
Right.
Like, don't cry that you got what you want. You know what? You wanted Reagan, you wanted to save America's soul, and now your apples give you cancer. All right. That's not my problem.
Yeah.
So we open this episode with these 3 kids have all gotten sick, and a doctor's like, these children are poisoned. I'm going to call the guy who's poisoning them. Whit.
I don't know what to make of this.
Another one?
Yeah, that makes 3.
They're all sick with the same thing?
Yeah, upset stomachs, according to Dr. Garrison. Not too serious, but when he gets this many calls in one day, he has to check into it. Wit's end is the only thing all 3 of the kids had in common. He said it might be caused by something chemical.
So Whit is poisoning children.
Right.
This is a new development, as far as we know.
I'm honestly surprised it even got to this point. This was kind of like a courtesy call, right? This is not sicking the force of the state on Whit.
Yeah, there's no police coming in. There's just, hey, you're poisoning children. Just thought you should know.
If you're doing it purposefully, stop or continue. I don't know. No one has power over Whit, so he could keep doing it.
I'm just reminded because I used to help out my horrible landlord. Long story. My landlord was what you might describe as an Afghan Guido. He moved to Brooklyn when he was 10 from Afghanistan and internalized South Brooklyn. And he was at one point a bodybuilder named Sonny Abs, and he runs a chain of health food restaurants in Brooklyn and Queens. And
Holy shit.
I was helping him with like book stuff, like basically keeping records of things for his daily pay sheets and things like that. And a lady called and said that she had gotten sick and had to go to the hospital because of the food at his restaurant. And she was like, what are you going to do about it? And he was basically, it seemed like she was trying to like either get free food or money from him. And he's like, lady, I got insurance. I don't give a fuck. Take it up with them. And just hangs up. And that to me is what an actual Republican small business owner would do, as opposed to Whit being like, I need to Sherlock Holmes this.
Right. And that's kind of where we do end up going then is Whit realizes pretty quickly that the problem lies in the apples that he has been purchasing from Tom Riley.
Which he uses to make fresh apple turnovers every morning. Whit's End has a bakery now.
Yeah, that's actually I didn't even think about that. I
also enjoyed that he gave a girl a banana split that also has other fruits on it.
Yeah. The famous banana split with apples.
With apples on it.
I'd like to imagine he just gave her a bowl of fruit and was like, it's a banana split. It's like, there's no ice cream. And then he just leaned forward and said,
there's no banana.
It's a banana split. And you'll like it. So yes, it turns out that farm that has the poisoned apples is in fact the farm of our beloved Tom Riley. So Tom's poisoning the children.
And his horses are getting poisoned too.
All of his horses are stolen by... This isn't that was supposed to mean all my apes are stolen. That didn't work at all.
Well, all my apes are gone.
All my apes are gone. All my horses are gone.
All my horses have colic, apparently.
All my horses have colic.
It's incredible to me that his horse's name is Rachel, and I keep forgetting his horse's name is Rachel. But you know who didn't forget the horse's name was Rachel? The man who lost his wife to Rachel in the divorce.
Famously. Rachel and Leah are the horses. It's a Bible reference.
Yeah.
Oh, God damn it. I knew it.
Oh, man. All right. There you have it. Milo from Trash Future has a joke about how you can really tell posh, upper class English people because the women all have dogs' names and the dogs all have women's names. So like you meet a girl and you wonder if she's posh or not. And her mom's name is Mufti and her dog's name is Jane. And that was sort of the first thing I was like, why did you name your horse Rachel? Like that just
Governess Mufti has a really wonderful ring to it.
Well, and something that that is interesting about Tom's Farm, and, this comes into play at multiple points in these episodes that we listen to, is that it really is, in a lot of ways, a linchpin of the community, right? Like, it provides a lot of agriculture, and it seems to be some pretty prime real estate, and it sits right on a creek, and that creek empties into a pond. This is where Kurt fishes, and Kurt, we'll remember, is the kind of shitty kid who has a distant alcoholic dad, and he goes fishing at Tom's Pond.
Yeah, every single week. Yeah, he goes to Trickle Lake and he fishes, and...
Well, there are a few sick fish down at your creek. Pretty disgusting if you ask me.
What are you talking about?
Well, haven't you been down there?
No, not for a couple of weeks.
Well, you have fish lying on the banks, caught up in the rocks even. It's no fun catching dead fish.
One of them has 3 eyes.
You're telling me the fish in the creek are dying?
Not dying. They look dead.
Thanks for the clarification, Kurt.
Yeah. How could you tell if a fish was dying from looking down on it? Is it
I had the same
If
question.
you've ever seen a fish, they could convince you they were dying with anything that they do.
Absolutely.
Any one of their behaviors makes you think like they're taking their last fucking breath.
Well,
they're brilliant actors.
I mean, this is Death Stranding is happening.
Sure,
Right? He's
sure.
on the beach. There's a nude Norman Reedus holding a baby.
Right.
And there's
He's
all
shaking
of these
the baby
fish.
a little too hard, and it's not
Strange,
completely recovering.
unexplained footprints are just appearing in the sand around the creek bed. Yeah.
A guy with a Danish accent. All of these things. Tom also brings up the fact that he uses very few chemical pesticides.
He's an organic
or
farmer.
herbicides. He doesn't let crop dusters fly over. He says, that makes me nervous.
His concern is probably that he saw North by Northwest, and that one scene just really freaked him out.
Oh, I mean, to be fair.
That's why he also won't wait for a bus at remote road stops.
He has to wait till Whit hails one for him.
They find out that there's definitely some kind of chemical problem here, and they decide to investigate this themselves because, as we said before...
What about one of those government environment agencies? Aren't they supposed to help in a case like this?
I called twice and left messages on the answering machine.
Oh, our tax dollars at work.
They had all those cutbacks. I think our local man's only part-time. I'll call the state capitol first thing in the morning.
Well, that's all fine, but this is my responsibility. It's my land and my apples, and I don't want to hand it off to somebody else.
That doesn't... No. No.
No.
Like, even if it is being handled by you, you have to take it to a civil court or something if you're ever going to seek any sort of actual damages.
I do think it's interesting here, though, that Whit, as per usual, has a direct line to all of the governments, right?
Yes.
And we're going to see how that fails a couple episodes down the line.
And it really is funny. He's like, all these cuts that have happened for some reason. Who knows why? Who knows why these cuts are going on? Certainly nothing that's been happening for the last decade.
Just
here.
the mysteries of the universe,
Our tax dollars at work.
This show has kind of a collision between, an immovable object and unstoppable force in the sense that...
The show is Joker-fied, yes.
Yeah, kids are, especially in the 90s, and I presume this is the 90s because it's still the original voice actor for Whit.
This is September of 1990.
Yeah, so especially the early 90s, like ecology, environmentalism stuff was fucking huge. And I don't know, I think we're similar in age, but I can very much remember that era as a real little kid and the stuff that my older brother and his friends were talking about and doing and the stuff that was on TV. So like there's this appeal of recycling, environmentalism, save the environment, stuff like that. But also the government is bad because this is made by Focus on the Family. And so in a way, the problem here is that this is meant for kids, and you can't necessarily win kids over even if they're already a captive audience by saying, saving the environment is gay. And so you have to make environmentalism the good guy in this in some capacity. It so wants to be like, you remember in Ghostbusters, is it Ghostbusters 2 or the first Ghostbusters where the EPA guy is the villain? It's that kind of thread. It really, really wants to go down that, but it can't because they didn't find a way to make the EPA and the government and the Libs the villain in a story where a chemical company or pharmaceutical company is dumping its byproducts in the river.
You might be pleased to learn they will. later in just a couple of years. We'll actually talk about that a little bit further later on when we talk about a
what I
specific
basically was going to say though is just from my
yeah.
experience in the early 90s, like this is not quite the days of Captain Planet, but it's the days of the environment that led to people realizing that a show like Captain Planet would be popular.
Sure.
Right. Like Earth Day, ecology, save the environment, that kind of stuff. That was, I mean, for people who may not be old enough to remember it, that shit was huge at that time, especially among like there was a kind of almost organic activism, sort of save the rainforest kind of shit among, say, like older primary school kids, middle school, high school age kids. Right. And so like this definitely felt like a product of that time, but also some subtle digs to make sure you understand you're listening to Republican propaganda too.
Definitely.
It's the basic environmental message here wasn't part of the culture war, really. Like it was like, recycle, do this,
recycle,
don't
reduce, reuse, don't enclose the loop.
Yeah. Like it wasn't a hot button. Everyone read the Lorax and was like, yeah, that sounds bad. Yeah. What they're doing to those truffulas.
We weren't there yet, right? Like the culture war machine hadn't quite been able to drive the wedge yet. So everybody was broadly able to agree that poisoning fish was bad, for instance.
Yeah, and that we want to generally like try and take care of the planet. It's just sort of like our ways to go about doing that differ wildly.
Yeah, and I think that you have to consider, both internationally and in the US, you have stuff like Love Canal or Exxon Valdez, or internationally you have Chernobyl. You have stuff like the Cuyahoga River catching on fire in Cleveland and stuff like that.
The Bhopal disaster in India.
Yeah, absolutely. You have these really, and I would say, I was just thinking about the timeline. Exxon Valdez would be a huge one because that was like on TV so much at the time. For people who don't remember, the Exxon tanker Valdez crashed off of I think it's Prince William Sound in the Panhandle of Alaska, and spilled crude oil fucking everywhere and killed a ton.
And it's still there.
It's still there. Yeah. It's been cleaned up. It was 33 years ago.
Yeah,
but at the time,
you're right. That would be totally present.
Yeah, because it was in early 1989 when it happened, and so this was just this, and this was on TV in the same way, like almost in a way that these things hadn't previously been, because you had gotten into the era of 24-hour news at this point, or at least like the early kind of beginnings of it. I feel as though this is 100% of its time, whereas nowadays my impression is that they've squared that circle in this sort of, call it right-wing evangelical community, by basically being like, ecology is good, but also climate change isn't real, that kind of stuff.
We would be worried about the poisoned fish, but there are no poisoned fish, as they gesture at a whole lake of poisoned fish.
Exactly. And I would say too, it's weird for me because I've met people who were pretty right-wing in terms of like their overall life views, who were super into ecology in the military. Like people who would basically be like, they were basically Republicans in the military, but they were members of the Sierra Club. Like there is that overlap, and
absolutely,
and that's why Elizabeth Warren wanted the military to lead conservation efforts in the United States.
But really, like, you're exactly right, Nate. I mean,
God, I forgot about that.
Those people, like, most oftentimes those people are hunters, fishermen, like, or hikers. If a big part of your recreational pursuits involve nature and being out in the wild, you naturally have an affinity for that thing, and you want to see it protected.
Yeah, right.
Tom and Whit are paleo. They've rejected modernity. And like Whit is a Tulian perspective guy, actually.
I see.
Yeah, that banana split you were talking about, you thought it was just a bowl of fruit. No, it's fucking pemmican.
So let's get to the investigation.
Yeah, Whit and Tom recruit Kurt.
Yeah, what the hell?
To go and look around the river.
He's so bored. He sucks.
So what I found out was this was supposed to be the janitor, Bernard Walton.
Oh, that would have made more sense.
They couldn't get Dave Madden to record this episode, so they changed it kind of last minute. So they take Kurt along and they find a barrel.
I pictured like literally like green, radioactive, glowing kind of thing.
And it says a name that's going to be very important in the years to come. Edgebiter Chemical Company.
It's the name of a porn site, and you can't convince me otherwise.
I was going to say, that's when you're eating somebody out and you just like are teasing them.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And then what, Josh?
Yeah, and then what happens?
And then what?
Well, you bite around the edges first.
What? Yeah.
And then you just proceed to the main event. It's a classic situation.
Okay, well, that's...
cut that.
Great.
No, that's the preview.
No, you absolutely have to leave that in. Also, leave in the drops of Whit grunting. It's important that we get that on tape.
So they go to the Edgebiter corporate headquarters, which are here in Odyssey. For some reason, this is like a national corporation.
Yeah,
and they're in this town of 30,000 people.
Well, they're also they also share a complex with a comic book store. It
has retail space.
Big insecticide conglomerate comic book complexes. I've heard so much about.
Can we talk about the zoning implications of this? Like the way that Odyssey is designed as a town or as a city.
It's a nightmare. It's an Escher painting.
This is still presumably within city limits.
I think this was one of Glossman's pet projects where he's like, I want office parks with retail space.
Right. Mixed use development is of the devil.
Yes.
But also, it's made very clear to us that Edgebiter's office is the only commercial property at all besides the farm. So effectively there's a park, there's woodlands, there's was it Tom Riley's farm, and then there's this corporate headquarters and nothing else. Like it as you said, it seems as though Glossman has chosen these locations just to own the people in this radio play. Like that makes no sense otherwise.
Right.
Like he's effectively like, what would really piss them off if like Pollution Corp was right next to their farm. Otherwise it just doesn't make any sense to you. Or actually Odyssey is more than 30,000 people. We just haven't explored that part of the world map yet. So we don't know how big it is. Odyssey is like when the Borg take over in like the Hell future in that episode of Star Trek The Next Generation.
Yes.
Like it's just one big city planet that's all Odyssey.
Well, and you're right. I think maybe it's a situation sort of like when you're playing Civilization and much of the map is still shrouded in fog. We still need to travel to those tiles to reveal what's on them.
So we go to Edgebiter. We get the runaround. They're trying to get to somebody.
And then three times.
They find a PR lady who will talk to them.
The other thing you must consider, Mr. Riley, is that we don't manufacture the chemicals here. These buildings are just our corporate offices. The chemicals for our insecticides are manufactured in Chicago under the utmost care and supervision.
Chicago.
Oh, interesting.
Manufactured in Chicago.
God, interesting.
Chicago. What?
I can't. God damn it. He is the Napoleon of crime.
The raving lunatic Dutchman strikes again. Regis Blackguard and his many Chicago conglomerates producing chemicals and electronics.
And Nate, you never actually listened to any episodes with Blackguard, right?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's entirely possible that you'll subject me to them in the future. But
the thing is, when Blackguard returns, it's like a 12-parter, so we're gonna have to have a lot of guests.
Yeah, we're gonna actually go through the whole thing and have a series of guests. It's gonna be great.
Yes.
Oh boy, I can wait. There was a moment. There's a fun little interplay where one of the people at Edgebiter thinks that Tom Riley's wife is named Rachel, but it is in fact his horse, and there's a comedic beat.
Is it though?
His wife's name is
the horse wife thing is done 2 or 3 times in this episode, I think.
They found a joke, so they thought we don't need to make another one.
His wife is alive?
So he has a dead wife and he has an alive wife, yeah.
Okay.
And he has a dead son.
And he has a dead son.
His alive wife is Agnes.
Okay.
So after this whole run around, clearly this is Whit sort of sees both sides because that's what he does. Tom though is like, well, I'm not an environmentalist, but there shouldn't be pollution here. He's very clear that he's not an environmentalist.
I don't know nothing about this here pollution, but I'm as a simple countryman.
So they decide.
I know that I want to eat my own apples.
So they decide to go down to the creek behind the building and trespass? Question mark?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So they take the 9-year-old kid with them in the middle of the night to the parking lot of the chemical company so that they can go around and look for horrific poisonous chemical leaks illegally.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and the parents are like, yeah. I mean, it's Whit, so we would say no, but we can't.
And it's not long before they're apprehended by a security guard who's on the rounds.
I love the security guard who's like, where do you think you're going? He's got this strong mob vibes. And I'm
Before they go out to this parking lot, Whit has revealed to Tom that he has done his own testing of the soil nearby.
So there's
like,
now
he's just
a
been out
bakery and a chemistry lab. Yeah, I mean, there's a meth lab in the basement of Whit's
It's the same thing. Yeah, he develops photos.
Right.
He makes drugs.
You can't spell Walter White without Whit. That's all I'm saying.
There we go.
Yeah.
And the next scene really then, after, they've been apprehended and they've been brought in to meet the boss of Edgebiter.
They meet Mr. Edgebiter himself.
Yeah.
Which is also like Edgebiter, great name for a chemical company, obviously not a human being's name.
Yeah, well, that
is a name you make when you're starting a company that makes poisons or computers or something.
Like give you a little peek behind the curtain a bit. My idea for the commercial for this week was going to be a guy named Johnny Edgebiter. And the fucking show fucking stole my idea, and it was real bullshit.
Johnny Edgebiter walks across the country planting little chemicals in the soil to poison all the apples.
And so they face off with Mr. Jerry Edgebiter and Nate.
Yeah, so here I've got
let's do that first.
The clip where
jobs are one thing, but even good jobs won't replace
he's like, you'll put all these people out of work if the police come.
Of course, I've heard it all before. Big, bad chemical company is destroying the earth. But before you preach to me about the environment, let me put the question to you, Mr. Riley. Ooh. When you finish a can of soda, do you throw the can away or recycle?
Well, the things we do.
How about newspapers, junk mail, and all those bits of paper you have around your house? Do you throw them away or recycle them?
I think you're evading the point.
Not at all.
No, you are.
Absolutely.
No, he's not. No, this is a completely good faith argument.
When you take your children's temperatures, you're exposing them to mercury in a way because it's in the thermometer, and that's why it's okay if they drink it.
Right. I'm curious now. This is the crux of the arc, right? Is that yes, we made a little whoopsie boo boo, and we're going to fix it. But also, whomst among us has not damaged the environment in some meaningful way? And at the end of the day,
irreparably.
And at the end of the day, is what we're doing here really so different from you not recycling? And
and this is while this guy is explicitly asking these characters not to go to the regulatory agencies and not to let him get into legal trouble because it will cause a problem.
Right.
And so then we get his further explanation here, talking to Kurt.
You see, it's easy to blame chemical companies like mine for all the environmental problems.
Correct.
Laws are passed, regulations are imposed, and that's fine. I try to operate within those restrictions.
I don't think you do.
Yes, and sometimes I make mistakes. It's inconvenient, even expensive to do everything they want. But where are the laws for you? How many conveniences are you willing to give up?
There are laws. There are laws.
There are lots of laws.
Like, you can't just throw your trash everywhere. There's litter laws, but he's making the point without realizing that he's making it, right? Like the problem is huge. Yes, it's this huge, but to avoid tragedy of commons, you can use smaller, more focused laws. You can simply, if you don't want the problem of aluminum waste with soda cans, well, if the soda cans are illegal to make, then you can't have anybody littering with them. There is a complete understandable logic that they're dancing right along in this episode while still saying, actually, no, the real solution is if you just wrap up your plastics, separate them out, have a different truck pick them up, which none of this is bad.
No.
But it's also we were taught, especially in the 90s, especially in the Ted Turner, Captain Planet kind of stuff, that it's you just separate everything out and everything's going to be fine. Whereas 70% of all plastics have never been and will never be recycled because they can't.
And then, of course, what ends up happening is that plastic, just like everything else, breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller particles, so that now we're at a place where, 50 plus years after the initial plastics revolution, fish have fuckloads of plastic in them and always will, because it's just part of the ecology now.
And it's turning the frickin' frogs gay.
I think about this too with regard to this being posited as a solution because, even now it's not always guaranteed that you're going to be able to recycle anywhere you live. I used to live in Anchorage, Alaska, and we had curbside trash pickup, but if you wanted to recycle, you had to take it to the recycling point. They did not offer curbside pickup of recyclables. They're literally the pamphlet you'd get from the waste management company was basically if you don't want to take it down yourself, then just throw it away and we'll throw it in the landfill. Yeah. And then I remember when I was living there, I remember they were after December 31st, 2009, we won't accept glass to recycle because it's just too expensive to recycle it from Alaska. It's just going to go in the landfill. And so it's like, if you live in the state of Alaska, like a state massively dependent upon, ecology for tourism, you cannot recycle glass. The thing that will literally stay in the environment for fucking ever if it's not recycled. Similarly when Rudy Giuliani...
it's the same time. Yeah, it's the same thing in my hometown too. Like sometimes the recycling center just shuts down. They can't handle the load, so they're like, we're closed.
I used to drive all my recyclables down to the place where you could put them out in Anchorage and do all that work myself, because it was important to me, but there was no way to recycle certain things. And I was just going to make this other point too, that, a few years after this episode aired, when Rudy Giuliani became mayor of New York City, he just canceled the city's recycling contract to own the Libs. Jesus. So all of a sudden there just wasn't any recycling happening for the largest city in America because Rudy Giuliani was basically, well, the Libs like recycling, so I'm going to own them by making it impossible in this city.
I mean, look, I'll stand for a lot on this podcast, but you go after America's mayor like that, sir. That Nosferatu motherfucker should just... he makes me sad to be Italian, which is hard because it's such a joyful existence.
I mean, I also got to say, too, it's very funny because I never want to give Joe Biden too much credit, but it is very funny during the primaries in, I want to say 2008, when Biden was still running for president, when Giuliani was considered at some point a serious Republican candidate, and Biden was just like, you already know what you're going to get from this guy. Every sentence that comes out of his mouth is noun, verb, 9/11.
That was it. He bodied him. That was the one thing that bodied him in the same way that Elizabeth Warren bodied Bloomberg in that one debate. You just point out the one thing, and that's it. That you've used their power phrase, right? Their kill switch. You flip the kill switch.
That was that was Chris Christie with Marco Rubio, where Rubio used the same line twice about let's dispense with the fiction that Barack Obama is doesn't know what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. He said it twice, and Christie is like, this is what happens when you're a moron and you pay consultants. They teach you one line, you say it twice in the same debate. Right. It's just like, fuck Chris Christie, but I appreciate him.
No, it's great.
Before that debate, he was like, I'm gonna own Marco Rubio. I'm gonna destroy him, and then he actually did.
It's so good.
Yeah, you know what? I respect it. I mean, I don't necessarily respect Rudy Giuliani destroying the environment more because he wanted to own the Libs, but I make that point because in this show, that's the solution. The sort of moralizing solution is it's bad when companies pollute, but let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Not recycling that. You buying cans of soda that have those little plastic 6-pack things on them is the exact same as this company dumping fucking cadmium into the river.
Right.
And again, those plastic 6-pack things wouldn't exist if the company was not able to make them.
Exactly.
Right.
So I was looking at Focus on the Family's history on environmental stuff, right? If Whit actually calls the state, he still gets the regulatory police in. Good for him in this case, in this one case. Focus on the Family, I couldn't find anything like usual on the internet. You can't really find a lot of their stuff from the 90s about what they're saying about the environment. It was probably pretty much in line with this, go to your local recycling center and be a good steward or whatever.
Right.
But later on, you see this framing a lot in articles from the 2000s where they really need to go after abortion and they really need to go after the global warming people. So they focus entirely on the arguments around overpopulation.
Oh, interesting.
And how people aren't having kids because of the environment. People are saying not to have kids because of the environment. People are aborting all their babies as sort of an environmentalist genocide.
That's definitely what's happening.
Yeah, 100%.
So I found an article just from 2 years ago, Phil Steiger, where at one point it's about something else. It's just about how should we handle tough topics or whatever. But he puts in this weird little phrase where he says schools substitute out history classes for environmentalism and gender.
Yeah, that.
Yep. And then Focus in 2011, of course, we're getting to a nice hot 2012.
Oh, yeah. Rising to that nice boil. We
re-election.
love it.
They make a point of separating climate activism from people, right? It's oh, well, why don't you care about the people? If you're caring so much about the environment, you're losing sight of, and it's well, I mean, your own show has kids being poisoned by the poisoned apples. The people are always going to be downstream of this. But they also say, quote, why devote more attention to an unproven theory of global warming than to the reality of ongoing attacks against life, the family, and the Christian worldview?
Yeah.
But Focus on the Family's sort of flagship stays a little bit on the edge of the environmentalist stuff. They never attack it full bore, but they do have the Daily Citizen, which is their like news rag,
formerly known as Citizen Link.
They push out articles attacking like Greta Thunberg and like
just the bullshit, right?
Headlines saying proving climate change activists wrong. And that article was really funny because it showed the picture of the dolphins in Venice. The Nature is Healing picture as being like, look, it only took 2 weeks and everything's fine. Nature isn't on the precipice of destruction.
Which also was not real. That was a misattributed image, and we know all that.
What we see is like focus on the family. Of course, they want to keep their focus
on the family.
On the family.
Unwavering focus.
And so they'll even put out articles saying like, we're not scientists. We can't talk about like the scientific veracity of weather, climate change, blah, 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 blah. But the whole reason for focusing on the family is because they think the family is the core of everything. You can change the entire world through the family. And so the family has to therefore address everything, including the environment.
Right.
Which they then admit they're not capable of doing from their perspective because they're weasels.
But aren't they always trying to say that corporations are like a family? Like, a lot of the diehards are just like corporations should be like a family. Yeah.
Small family businesses. Yes. That's the other thing that's kind of interesting about this worldview is that generally speaking, they are not big fans of the modern American corporation. They're big fans of small individual family-owned businesses. That's the bedrock of American society for these people.
That was what I wanted to ask you guys was, do you feel as though focus on the family is hand in glove with like prosperity gospel stuff? Because I feel as though they have overlap.
I would love to speak to that.
Yes, please, Josh.
There is, of course, the prosperity gospel, that's like Joel Osteen, his whole thing, right? This idea that like, if you love God, you're going to get money.
And Jim Bakker back in the day.
Yes. That is slightly different from the theology that I think Focus espouses, which is dominionist theology. And dominionist theology, by the way, is the same theology that the DeVos family's whole worldview is based on. We actually did talk about this a little bit when we went on What a Hell of a Way to Die.
Yeah.
That the idea is not that you are just going to get blessed by God if you love him. The idea is that you need to go out and reclaim the world on his behalf. That is your mission, right? Something that I remember hearing growing up, because I listened to Adventures in Odyssey on the radio as a kid, is that every single episode of Odyssey would be buffered by some, like, I don't know, they were like fucking PSAs or something. I don't know where these came from. But I remember one specific one that was like, it started with this person being like, I want to change the world, but I don't know how. I'm just one person. I don't think that recycling my stuff will make a big difference. And then it would be like overlaid with other people saying the same thing until you had sort of this cacophony of people all saying, I, just don't know if as only one person I can do this. The idea being, of course, that individual choice, individual agency is still the primary thing through which we ought to examine our relationship with each other sociopolitically.
Yeah.
And by taking more individual agency to do things individually, that is the only way that we can collectivize as a society. That is also the main message of dominionism. We basically have Randian prime movers, all of whom do the thing. And they do the thing next to each other, not in direct cooperation with each other, but rather in collaboration in a free marketplace of ideas. And so that, I think, is what we have here, right? We have Edgebiter, which is basically a bad actor. They are not acting in... They're one bad apple, right? They are not acting in the same sort of like rational fashion that they ought to be doing as a business. And if they just were to actually pay attention to what the real needs are of the community, based on their own rational self-interest in serving that community, this wouldn't happen. And that, I think, is really the philosophy of this episode. Does that make sense, Nate?
It does, yeah. I mean, I think that, in a way, the underhanded digs at the government and the fact that the government comes last, it comes as a measure of last resort, but that the true solution here is the individual taking on individual responsibility. I feel as though, like, it's deft in a way because you've both articulated a pro-environmental message that is going to resonate with kids, but you've also hammered home that all responsibility to fix it is on the individual, and the individual act of either prudence or carelessness is equivalent to a business choosing to like violate environmental regulations at scale.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And that's an absurd comparison.
It's insane.
But it hammers home this idea, and but couched in concern for the environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's fascinating to me that a lot of conservative ideology, they love to use bad apples, right? It's mostly as a metaphor for, I mean, it obviously ties to like Christianity and all that, but also, it is a especially when they talk about like police forces and that sort of thing. It's like
or the military, like like Abu Ghraib, right? Like those guys were just bad apples. Certainly had nothing to do with the command structure or the military itself.
But right, it is the idea that the second half of that phrase always gets lost, which is spoils the bunch. And edge biter is a symptom of a larger disease, because Whit has to clarify at the end of the episode, oh no, hundreds of companies are good and honest, it was just this one that was dumping pollution. But if this one is dumping pollution, that must mean that there is a system in which they can, and if it's going to save them money and cut them costs, then of course other ones are doing it all across America. It's not just one bad apple, it's a whole fucking spoiled bunch, which is a wild worldview to take.
Hey folks, this is a preview, so you're at the end here, but if you go on over to our Patreon, you can check out the full thing where we go over 3 more episodes, including one of the weirdest lessons that we've ever seen about racism. You won't believe your ears, trust me. Pearl Harbor also gets discussed in a flashback episode, and then we meet no less than Johnny Appleseed. Anyway, we hope to see you there.